This is iDesign Lab, a podcast where creativity and curiosity meet style and design. Curator of interiors, furnishings, and lifestyles. Hosted by Tiffany Woolley, an interior designer and a style enthusiast, along with her serial entrepreneur husband, Scott. iDesign Lab is your ultimate design podcast, where we explore the rich and vibrant world of design and its constant evolution in style and trends. iDesign Lab provides industry insight, discussing the latest trends, styles, and everything in between to better help you style your life through advice from trendsetters, designers, influencers, innovators, fabricators, and manufacturers, as well as personal stories that inspire, motivate, and excite. And join us on this elevated, informative, and lively journey into the world of all things design.
Welcome to the iDesign Lab, where we tackle everything that you can think about having to do with design. Today, we're going to talk a little about ugly design. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about how ugly design is everywhere in our life. And we normally don't even think about it, realize it. We sometimes laugh about it. And actually, sometimes, and a lot of times, ugly design does very well in retail and does very well as a business, from either logos to design of products or the way things work.
Well, it has a lot to do with form equals function. So sometimes those two things don't equal beauty. So, I think a funny example that kind of gets everybody's brain jogged is the Crocs shoe.
Correct.
Because obviously they're not attractive in any way, shape, or form. However, it is a billion-dollar brand.
Right. So when Crocs came out, everyone looked at it saying, what is that?
Yeah.
God,
like
how ugly could that be? Why would someone wear that?
Exactly.
But it became very, very big. Even like most chefs use some sort of Croc. I don't know exactly why, because I think it's
I don't either.
ergonomically.
An ergonomic situation,
yeah,
which we've talked
comfortable.
about before. So that's another reason that leads to ugly design too. Ergonomics in general doesn't lead to beautiful design. I think sometimes the beauty is in its cleanliness.
Well, Crocs are comfortable,
and Crocs are clean. It's it's one material. It's not busy, even though it's got a lot of detail. It's very simple.
Yeah. So we wanted to spend a few minutes today on this podcast just to talk about ugly design, like Crocs, as we just mentioned. Another one that everyone kind of forgets about, but there's that one time of the year where everyone it comes right back in your face, are and they call them the ugly Christmas sweaters.
Oh, yeah.
I think everybody probably has owned one or worn one and laughed about it. I've had a few over the years, and when I would get one, I would say, I'm not going to wear this. This is as ugly as could be. But then I find myself...
It's nostalgic. It's kind of a feeling. And we operate on feelings in this world we live in nowadays.
Right. And just think of how many people have had ugly sweater or ugly, sweater parties, or you have to attend the party wearing an ugly sweater.
Yeah, they still do. It's like a thing. You're right. And I go back to the form and function, but also, as I just said, feelings, because so much about design is a feeling. And I know even in the interior design field, a lot of, high-end designers that I actually follow and, look to for reference and inspiration, some people might be like, oh, that's ugly. So beauty really is in the eye of the beholder.
Correct.
And there's some people who find simplicity ugly. There's some people who find, over design ugly. But I kind of go back to with design as like what has stood the test of time. So obviously an ugly design is becomes like a kitschy part of time. It's like, oh, you remember this or you remember that because of, like you said, ugly sweater, or Croc generation, or like these, super modern houses, like was like the Miami Vice, the 80s, and it's kind of coming back again. So I feel like it's proving to stand the test of time in the long run.
But if you walk into a house that was decorated in the 80s, most people walk into the house going, oh my God,
geez.
How ugly is this?
Yeah.
But back in the 80s, that was like the in thing.
So cool. And now, like, you do walk into homes and you walk into places that are full of like a time warp, and you do be like, oh my goodness, like how can somebody keep this? And I mean, whoever thought of a round bed being like a great idea?
Right.
I mean, it's kind of, so there's some things through generations and through time that we kind of scratch our head at. But for the most part, I feel like
So some
beauty's
ugly
in the
comes
eyes.
in and out over the years. So
Right.
some
It's a fad.
ugly stuff, is a fad. But then there's also ugly, like I think about Gap. Gap changed their logo a number of years back, and they changed just the font to a Helvetica font, and there was such an uproar over what it looked like that literally 6 days later, Gap quickly changed it across, all of their retail platforms and stores, putting it back to the logo or the font that we know today.
Well, sometimes with design or referring to ugly design, it could also be really, in a nutshell, the lack of design.
Mm-hmm.
You could even say Apple is an ugly design, the brand of Apple. Their design is very sterile. It's very minimal. There is really
Simple.
no design. Right. It's not like of beauty, but the beauty is in its simplicity. So it kind of taught us to appreciate it. So sometimes ugly design gets appreciated over time and over as people's tastes evolve and grow, your appreciation.
Well, some of the ugly design is the lack of design or the lack of information. Great example of that is IKEA. IKEA in almost everything that you buy, and it's a huge, huge multi-billion-dollar retail company. But when you buy something, almost everything has to be assembled. And there's always been the complaints of the fact that there's no instructions. It's just pictures. And it's a very difficult design for many people to follow, and many people feel it's a really ugly way of which they've put their instructions together. But they've continued, and it's made them successful.
Well,
And it's also, because of that, people have talked about it. People complain about it, but
they
still
say as long as they're talking about you, it's a good thing, right?
Right. So ugly design sometimes really works and is very helpful if it is ugly, because you'll get more PR out of it.
I think
more
that
exposure.
was probably the truth for Crocs as well. And I'm sure there's others along the way we could consider that fell into that same category.
Right. But then there's other, like the internet. Think about Craigslist.
Those are websites.
Correct. The Craigslist website is a very ugly, there is no design, but it's very successful, and it does what it needs to do with very little and lack of design. Almost it's like a throwback to when the internet first started, and they haven't changed it. Even Google and Facebook, when they first started, was a really simple, somewhat ugly design, but it came about, and
Well, anytime there's innovation and there's things that are new, you're going to open yourself up to criticism, which is, ugly design or function. And I feel like those feelings evolve over time. And same thing, like whenever, like I know, like they've mentioned, like when the Olympics changed their logo in London, and just things when people aren't prepared for those changes, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's ugly. I know, like when we drive around town and there's a new building going up, that you're familiar with, that Walgreens used to be on the corner or what have you. But when you're driving around, you'll be like, oh, that's what they're putting there? Oh, like how did that pass, the building department, after I deal with the building department on a daily basis, making our life miserable as we're trying to make things more beautiful. Or even when it's historic properties, we're definitely trying to preserve beauty and history. They make our life crazy, but then all this ugly design gets approved. Like, how does that even happen?
that I don't have an answer for. But if you think
But
about,
it's a feeling.
but there's also design where some of the ugly design is intentional. Spirit Airlines, when Spirit Airlines launched, they wanted to be known as an inexpensive airline to fly.
So they wanted to look cheap.
So they wanted their logo. They wanted the way in which their planes were, painted up, logoed up.
Yeah.
Was done to
Goofy.
look kind of cheap, and that it would resonate with people going, oh, that's an inexpensive airline.
That's
Even the
so
way in which
funny.
the interior of the planes were designed was
All
kind
those
of to
colorful-
make you feel as though this is a
Low rent.
yeah.
Again, you said feeling. So I really think a lot of this is feeling. So, and beauty is in the eyes of the beholder.
Right. But going back to the 1950s with McDonald's, when McDonald's launched.
The golden arches.
The golden arches. People didn't quite understand. Okay, McDonald's and an M, but people thought, like, what kind of design, what kind of logo or design is that? Didn't make sense. People thought back in the 50s and the early 60s when McDonald's was starting out that it was an ugly design. But people don't think about that today because it's a $1 billion international brand, everywhere on the planet.
Well, think of like even the 80s is definitely like hallmarked by neon and, the 80s kind of owns ugly design,
right.
Not just in residential, but just in the overabundance of kind of ugly, I guess. It's really...
We'd love to hear from people on what they think is ugly design. If you've got an ugly design that you're familiar with,
please share.
Hit us up on Instagram and let us know. We'd love
Give
to
us
hear.
your best ugly.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's our tidbit for today.
Thanks for being part of us with some ugly design.
iDesign Labs podcast is an SW Group production in association with the 5-Star and TW Interiors. To learn more about iDesign Lab or TW Interiors, please visit twinteriors.com.